I would like to cover the subject of the renewable energy transition in South Africa in particular. It's going to be my focus area, and some of the opportunities that exist as a result of the industry. If you allow me, I will start to pitch at the level of the energy crisis in South Africa being what I consider South Africa is possibly the epicenter of the energy crisis in the world today. We have got, one could argue, an existential crisis in the energy business right now, or in business in general as a country. But this also cascades into the continent at large. And the demands to fix the energy situation and possibly to use it as a pathway to recreating a new economy for the continent is very interesting. Churchill talks about never wasting away a good crisis. So we have got a crisis, but it's a good crisis for the continent, for the country, or for the continent at large. The reality is that I think as we fix the energy situation, we are presented with a new economic opportunity to almost leapfrog and possibly rejig the general economy of the continent, especially after some of the impact we suffered during COVID. So you look at the energy crisis and you ask, what is the opportunity that it is now presenting? What is the opportunity that it's now bringing onto the continent? And so, number one, we have got the opportunity of firstly decarbonizing the economy, but I could even put decarbonization as a third leg. The first leg is to bring energy security and energy stability into the continent. The second one is to bring in affordable. So it's energy security first, then we've got to bring the component of affordability to the energy situation. The last leg would be the decarbonization that comes in. And I put that order deliberately because if we start talking about decarbonization in the continent, in South Africa, when we are in the dark, that's a very difficult value proposition. The correct value proposition is to first stabilize the energy. The second one is to contain the cost of energy. And the third one is to start to contribute towards the carbon journey that the global world is on. We also all feel the impact of climate today. And so we too should be seen to be contributing towards a solution. Now, what do we do as a solar industry? We have got a very unique technology that aligns perfectly with what the continent has in abundance. In abundance, Africa has got a lot of solar array, which should now be converted into electrons. And those electrons are now supposed to come to the fore and help us to do the leapfrogging that we need to do. We have got also human talent to be able to deploy some of these solar arrays, panels across the whole continent, whether we deploy them on top of buildings, whether we deploy them on top of homes, whether we deploy them in farms. We can do that with very minimal constraint. We do have the roofs. I like to call them dam roofs because they're just there gaining dust. So you can beautify them and at the same time, you can increase the value of your roof. by just putting solar panels. Then you have got farms. Now, if you can use the farm for agriculture, please leave it for agriculture, because there is a lot of farms that are most ideal to be utilized for other non-usable activities, such as solar farming. So for a farmer today, you can do crops, you can also farm energy. And then I think beyond that, we now have got certain technologies, such as this battery storage technology, which is moving at a very fast pace, and it allows us to also store some of that power and dispatch it at the most opportune time. One of the challenges that we find is to provide a good mix between solar and, say, dispatchable energy. And dispatchable energy comes in form of battery technology. So those two technologies in particular are very easy to deploy, and they are also developing very fast. So those are some of the opportunities that is now available towards this transition. The last point I would also make is on the issue of what I call the ecosystem, the energy ecosystem. I think if you start with South Africa in particular, one of the biggest assets Eskom has today is its transmission infrastructure. The transmission infrastructure is a robust investment which took many, many years to build, but actually could easily become a white elephant if there's not enough electrons going through that transmission infrastructure. So there is now an opportunity to open up that ecosystem, liberalize that ecosystem, to allow private players to use what we call wheeling and move the electrons around the transmission infrastructure. At COP, someone made a comment that there is no transition without transmission. So the moment we start to utilize and monetize our transmission network, it is the moment that we're going to start to see a significant transition coming through. I would not leave out the opportunity for job employment creation and sucking in a lot of the talent that we have, the young talent, as we go through this journey of decarbonization, as we go through this transition journey. And when we talk about the just transition, we are also making reference to the opportunity to empower the young population through the creation of jobs. The solar industry alone is a multi-billion-dollar opportunity across all its facets, whether it's the EPCs, whether it's the people that are making a saving from the cleaner energy that is more affordable, whether it is the corporates that are reducing their cost or improving their efficiencies because of the availability of energy. There is a huge knock-on effect in Jenny that looks to empower all the aspects of the ecosystem. There's always the local content piece, but I'm always very skeptical about that. If you're going to do local content, please make sure you're doing something that you are the best in the world at doing. Do not try to compete with the likes of China and try to do the things that China does for the whole world, and you're trying to do it for a small market. The economies of scale will always work against you. There are components in the renewable energy ecosystem that is perfectly fitted for localization. Deployment itself can only be done local. The work of construction can only be done local. The assembly of certain technologies like the battery technology, the cables that we use can also be localized. So there is a need for a bit of a rational thought process when we look at how do we localize the industry. But where we get the economies of scale from buying, for instance, solar panels, where they are done in billions, we have to be able to embrace that. And then look at the ecosystem and say, which piece of the puzzle can we do very well locally? And there are lots of those pieces. It need not be a political conversation. It needs to stay an economic conversation. So I think I would like to stop here. Let me know if there are any particular questions. Thank you.
So you're saying we have dumb roofs. In other words, we must make them speak. Make the roofs speak.
Not only speak, but they tell me when I come to your house and I put some solar panels on top of your roof, what tends to happen is your house immediately, the value of your house, regardless of where it is, goes up by 15 to 20% overnight. Why? Because your house is no longer like your neighbor's house, because your neighbor's house does not generate its own power. Your house generates its own power. And so there is a value that accumulates to that.
Right.
If you look at the rest of South Africa, for instance, today, conceivably every building can carry a solar panel on top of it. Why would you leave it to gain dust when you can just put panels and you're not losing a single thing in the process? And so, and by so doing, the whole day, you can just go completely off grid. And then in the evening, you can now start accessing power from Eskom, or you can put a battery in there. And there are now players. One of our businesses called Distributed Power Africa. We do that for commercial and industrial customers. So we finance it, we deploy it, we maintain it for the next 20 years. And we're saying to any business, stick to your core business. We will provide you clean power and possibly cheaper than what you're currently paying. Because obviously power cost of energy will continue to go up for the foreseeable future, because both the utility, where their source of power is very expensive, it's coal, and they have to import it. And so electrons are a currency of their own, and they tend to be a hard currency of their own. So naturally, the cost of energy is going to continue to go up. While it's the moment you do that to your roof, you have just locked that cost, and you have now have got full control of your energy cost.
The previous speaker was talking about starting a special economic zone, or it probably has been established for manufacturing PV panels. Do you know about that? What do you think?
Yes. So we have tried it before. Now, my recommendation is always, unless you are expecting a very significant protectionism from the government of the day, where the government of the day says, you can build your own solar panels, we will block any input so we can encourage your own solar panels to be adopted. What tends to happen is you start to create a trade war that you are not likely to win, because let me give you the facts. The current panels are probably costing 22 cents per watt. If you and this is for a factory that is doing probably 10 gigawatts. If we are doing barely 500 megawatts, you won't be able to compete with a guy who is doing 10 gigawatts in China. Now, there is a way to do it, obviously. You can partner with the guy who is doing 10 gigawatts. You bring in some of the components and you do the local assembly. But the risk of, we call it, in my book, I talk about return on investment versus return on ego. You always have to be very careful when you start to say, no, I want to do it. It's locally made in South Africa. Why do I need a panel locally made in South Africa and I pay 3 times the price when I can just get a top of the range panel, which is what we consider the Bloomberg standard, tried and tested, which banks will be willing to support and fund, because a panel has to last 25 years. So the assembling needs to be done in a very smart way. It's not supposed, if you've got an economic zone opportunity, first thing I would ask you to do is start assembling lithium batteries immediately, because they are too heavy anyway to bring them from wherever they are being made. So your international, there is a huge competitive advantage you get when you assemble things like batteries. The competitive edge on panels is yet to be seen. Now, I'm not going to dispute that there could be a breakthrough, but we talk about what we call, in Kenya, a man once went into a village, and in the village, on his way on the pathway, the man was from Europe. He found a small little thicket fence. He kicked it off. He continued to go in the village and he started shooting. He was shooting some photography. Then 2 days later, a lion came through that same pathway. This time, the thicket fence had been kicked away, and the lion continued and he started attacking the villagers. Then the men asked, but where is the noise coming from? And the villager says, well, some idiot removed the fence that we had put on the small little pathway, which was always protecting the lion for a long time. Now someone removed it and the lion has come to attack us. And the man said, oh, sorry, it was me, but I didn't think it made sense. It just looked like it was irrelevant. And said, you should have asked us before you kicked that thicket fence off. So before you do certain things, there is wisdom in trying to understand, why did we fail 5 years ago when we tried to do solar panels? A lot of companies lost their sheds when they tried to manufacture solar companies locally here. But it's simple economics 101. If you can't do a 10 gigawatt level, you might be in trouble. You need a Chinese factory does for the whole world. Now, you can compete with them or you can collaborate with them. If you're trying to compete, then you are asking a developer on the ground to make a choice to pay 40 cents per kilowatt per watt versus 22 cents. And you and me agree that economics doesn't work.
Mr. Moyo, when you're talking about job creation and empowering the youth, can you give me some ideas of what could help to create a lot of jobs?
So the opportunity, let's look at the ecosystem for opportunities for job creation. Number one, the simplest one is just in the installation for those who are electrically wired, those who have started as electricians. This is the biggest opportunity available. As I said, I don't know how many homes are there in South Africa, but I could hazard they run into thousands, if not a million homes. Every one of them does need an installation. Whether it's a 2-bedroom home in Kaelisha, in Soweto, in Mufakose, every one of those homes require an energy solution. Whether it's a major corporation, they need. So there's an opportunity for electricians, for handymen, to be able to start to put panels on top of the roof. There's also an opportunity for what we call energy audits. The smart cookies, every building in South Africa, for instance, and in Africa, is a dinosaur when it comes to smartness. It doesn't have the smarts. Most buildings are sitting on air conditioners that are so many years old, they are not even a job. The air conditioners that we deployed when we built most of these buildings, they are probably chewing more than, 10 times.
So the transitions that we have been talking about today and have been hearing about from our presenters are, first of all, the just transition, which takes into account climate change especially, and weighs up the various ways in which a transition to a secure energy future can be made. Then we heard from Mr. Dayan Naidu from TIA, and the transition, as I see it there, is not only towards renewable energy, but it's also a transition to innovation, to understanding that we have to invent our own solutions, and that there is some government assistance for that, and there are people who can give advice in that regard. So he gave us some advice on how to go about creating a new innovation that you want to take to market. And now we have Mr. Norman Moyo, who has been telling us about about entrepreneurship, specifically with regards to solar energy. And he has been talking about the empowerment of the youth as well, and saying that assembly of products is a very good way to go, because that is probably more economically viable than inventing things from scratch and manufacturing them from scratch. I hope that's correct. Norman, are you able to?
Yeah. I hope the power will keep us talking. So
Yes.
This is why we need to fix our power situation.
Yeah.
Apologies for that intermittent break. So yeah, I was just finishing off the opportunities for empowering the I think job creation. That was one of your questions. I had said there's an opportunity, obviously, in the hard in deployment of energy assets, whether it's electricians, engineers. There's an opportunity in the energy audits that exist. There's an opportunity in those who want to start cleaning companies, because these panels need to be cleaned. There's an opportunity for those who want to get into the drone industry. We need drones to be able to monitor most of these assets. So I can keep going on and on. So for the financiers, there is also an opportunity to start to build what we call yield costs to really start to expand. There's also the maintenance of these assets that we're deploying. So I think those are some of the opportunities that exist. And obviously in the channel, what you call the backward, when you start going back to the rest of the supply chain, is where we talk about what are some of the components of the energy business that can be done locally. And I was mentioning the assembly of batteries. I mentioned the production of cables. I mentioned things like even just the rails that we use on top of these roofs can all be done locally, particularly in markets like South Africa, where you've got a very strong capabilities. And still, at its peak, South Africa could produce almost anything and everything. So let us only import that piece that we can't do better than anyone in the world. Other than that, the rest we can do it locally here. So one of the questions I see on the chat is about whether the transition will probably, I think it's a whole body, is can the transition end up separating people? Will the energy crisis possibly create a disparity in the economics of the population? And he says our leaders live in different realities. I think the energy reality has caught up to everyone else. I can argue, even on behalf of the government, that they also feel the heat, because it's not like when load shedding happens, it doesn't separate between the haves or the have-nots. We all end up in the dark, albeit they can run their generator, but they get the heat from their constituencies. So it's hitting us across the board. What I like about the government is they have reacted accordingly. In all fairness, the problem of energy, particularly in South Africa, is a 30-year problem. It didn't start 3 years ago. It's a 30-year problem. We allowed it to lag for so long. We were doing a lot of intellectual conversations around technologies like nuclear that are very complicated for us to do, so we lost out on time. So unfortunately, now the chicken has come home to roast, but I think the system, the governments have reacted very well in terms of at least opening it up and inviting the private sector to provide a solution. I come from the telecoms background, and I can tell you, we were able to solve the telecoms conundrum because we allowed the private sector to come in. Telkom today is not the biggest telecom company in South Africa. By the way, it is Vodacom and MTN. So why? Because of liberalization, because we crowded in private capital and we solved the problem. So the problem of energy in South Africa is solved. We just haven't seen the full fruit of it, but it is solved. And eventually, it's going to equalize us from an energy point of view, because whether you're a top corporate or you're a small business, the solar panel shines on both of you equally, and you can all deploy panels equally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moyo, and for your very interesting images that you're using, that the solar panels shine on us equally, or they will eventually. And thank you for your optimism and the energy that you have brought to this discussion forum. Thank you very much indeed.